Counting down. Monday afternoon, it's coffee time with Michael Stone and Joe Lamb. How are you, Michael?
Good to see you, Joe. I'm doing good. What do you know? Are
Not
you
much.
are you in are you in the Delta formation?
Um, I'm in the can't hear you great setting, so I'm checking my settings.
All right. How's that?
Um, where do you check those settings? I know we went through this before.
Yeah, is
Here.
your other monitor hooked up?
Echo canceling speaker. I can hear myself. Play test sound. Okay, maybe it's just volume. Let me check the volume. So, how are you today, Michael? How was your
I'm
weekend?
doing pretty, I'm doing pretty good. I actually went to the Oregon coast. We there was no smoke there, which was great. We um, had a memorial for uh, an aunt, family member that passed from COVID, and so it was good to honor her life and brings a lot of things in perspective. We're short time here and a long time gone, but while we're here, you can live a really full life as she
Yeah.
did. Yep.
Um, Makes me think of that Crosby, Stills, Nash lyric, long time coming, long time gone, but change is a long time coming. Um, and certainly there's been a lot of change and a lot um, of angst, and we've covered those topics for a while now. And Michael and I were talking, and we were talking about how um, people are escaping on their weekends, and what's the health consequences of not so much escaping for a celebration of life, but escaping to enjoy life, as opposed to remembering someone's life. But in that enjoyment, we get some health concerns.
Yeah, how many people cause a little rotator cuff issue, or they decide to go jogging on the beach and suddenly a hamstring speaks to them, or their MCL, or they're just sore when they didn't think they used to be sore after doing that amount of physical activity. What are those things that we can do to um, before and after that help us out?
Yeah, um, that's an interesting question, isn't it? Um, and our bodies do better with a certain degree of activity. Um, you know, a little micro damage to the bone causes osteocalcin production, and that decarboxylated osteocalcin signals back to the pancreatic beta cells um, to make a little insulin, and it increases insulin sensitivity by signaling to muscle cells and to liver cells. It's very interesting in that regard.
Yeah, and how often do you it is, and then do you have the building blocks you need to help respond to that activity? You know.
Exactly, exactly. Um, when was the last time you did something and felt like you'd been a weekend warrior and overdid it? Have you had a recent occurrence of that?
Yeah, I swam too far, and suddenly my low back was hurting, and couldn't figure out why my low back was hurting, but really my hamstrings were tight. So I had to do that. And then you stretch the hamstrings, hey, the leg bone's connected to the knee bone,
Yeah.
And so, it was like, wait a second. Okay, let's go ahead and stretch. Let's go ahead and warm this up. Let's go ahead and ice this down. Let's go ahead and, take a little more vitamin C after workout to help deal with some of that collagen requirement for vitamin C. Hey, am I getting enough? Yeah, that wasn't too long ago.
Yeah. Well,
What about you?
the interesting thing is, what I took from your statement was how hard it is sometimes to see the connection. 2 weekends ago, I paddled rather extensively over a 4-day period. I hadn't been out in my kayak a ton for various reasons, and even did a couple twice in a day paddles, and then tweaked my knee just walking across the parking lot at work on Monday. And I was like, well, why would that happen? And when you're in your kayak, you're bracing. You brace with your feet against the foot pedals, and particularly when you've got a rudder, your bracing causes you to differentially brace with each foot, right? But like if you're bracing and you're not bracing with both feet, then you end up applying the rudder full on one side or the other. If you brace against one side and haven't braced against the other, you're going to push it all the way over. So having that, suddenly I tweaked my knee, and it was some ibuprofen, and it was some glucosamine, and it was a few days of not paddling. But I can tell you that I was back to paddling this weekend, and it felt good. And I didn't paddle twice a day like I had done previously.
Yep, all of it's just enough, but not too much.
Exactly.
Making sure you have those essential fatty acids to modulate inflammation and restore things. Making sure you have enough vitamin C to help your adequate protein make collagen for all the different parts that you need. I mean, it's all. There are more injuries in people who have diets that don't have enough of the healing macronutrients. It's harder to recover when you don't have adequacy of that protein, the essential fats, and all the other vitamins and minerals that we get from our colors. So
yeah,
or
just
to move,
or just to relax, right? Without enough magnesium. If we're magnesium deficient, the muscle's not going to relax as well. And one of the things we think about is energy is required for contraction, right? But we don't realize that energy is required for the relaxation of a muscle as well. And kind of in the heart, we talk about the failure of heart failure. Typically we talk about systolic heart failure, which is the contraction doesn't take place, but you also need it to relax during diastole, what's called diastolic heart failure, if it doesn't relax, which makes it stiff and doesn't let it fill. And similarly, stiff muscles not relaxing, and we end up having the consequences of that. So I mentioned today I did a Facebook Live on cardiovascular health earlier today, and I said that magnesium is my favorite mineral and remains so because of this reason as well.
It's very true. When you think of, I'll riff on magnesium. I think we're both magnesium fans. We could do a band, magnesium. I would just play air guitar though, and drums. And you think of it, it's cofactors in so many aspects of health, right? It's one of the key minerals for bone metabolism. We always think of calcium. We don't think about magnesium. We think it's key for, you mentioned diastolic function, and so it's key for having your heart a normal sinus rhythm. It's key cofactor for a whole series of your neurotransmitters.
Yeah.
And the key thing with that is, depending on the population, between 60 and 80% of Americans don't get enough magnesium in their magnesium to meet their needs, because their needs for magnesium increase when they drink caffeine or they drink alcohol or they live a high stress life. Who lives a high stress life? And our response to stress causes us to lose more magnesium via the urine. So it's one of those great favorite minerals.
It is. So, we've talked before about David Goggins and the can't hurt me principle, but he doesn't really, well, in his private life, he extends that to doing some ultra athlete craziness. But really, when he talks about it, the day-to-day piece, it's like increase by, a little bit more each day. If you did 500 yards, do 50 more. If you lift it, 95 pounds, try for 100 for a few reps. And in that kind of graded exercise program is a great way to build yourself up.
No, that's true. And even if you do that increase every other day,
Yeah.
It allows this gradual progression. And so, those are all good principles, but we can actually use that to if you decrease the amount of soda you drink today, maybe decrease it by 5% more. If you increase the amount of sleep you've gotten a day, maybe try to increase it by 10 minutes more. Adjust things,
Absolutely. And also, I think one of the key things about what you do is comparing yourself to yourself. It's an individual goal as opposed to comparing yourself to someone else. One of I guess an American woman was one of the first in a long time to win a medal. She got a bronze in the marathon at the Tokyo Olympics. And, we've come to think about marathons as being a reasonable and not necessarily an extraordinary athletic event. But I always think about what happened to the first person who ran a marathon.
Well, isn't that true? Isn't that true? And it comes down to purpose also, right? There was a purpose that he was running so hard, right?
Right.
And, what are your purpose? What are your purposes to improve your physical aptitude? What's the purpose to change your diet? What's the purpose to increase sleep? They're so tied together. Purpose, accomplishment, purpose, personal accomplishment. Try not to compare yourself to others or even yourself years ago. Compare yourself to yourself now and how things can change.
Yeah. And as we've talked about in this setting, is making it a functional goal. So something that purpose, reflects what's important, meaningful, and valuable to you, and then choosing a goal that gets you closer to doing the things you want to be doing. Like if you want to chase grandkids, you don't necessarily need to run a marathon. But if you want to run a marathon, then it's a different exercise program to get there.
Yeah, it is interesting. It is interesting, isn't it? A year from now, what would you be doing different lifestyle wise than you're doing now? Anything come to mind?
I still would like to chase that dream of the 70 and 48 hours. So the 70-mile paddle from the Foss Waterway to Port Townsend in a kayak. Um, but I let too much of the spring go by without preparing for that. And as it turns out this year, I'm very happy I didn't. 70% of the boats needed to be rescued.
Timing is everything.
Because of weather, exactly. I was very happy not to be there. Those white knuckle moments when you're doing something. I paddled Friday night and was a little white knuckled for a while. Paddled out from under the Raft Island Bridge heading for Cutts Island, and it was a hard paddle. And it's like one of those paddles, you're paddling into the wind and you're paddling into the tide, and suddenly you're doing a lot of paddling and not making very much forward movement. And then finally I was most of the way to Cutts Island and started realizing that if I was going to and I was already taking on a little bit of water, and I didn't have a skirt around my kayak, around the cockpit, and I was getting some water, and I suddenly realized that unless I was on a paddle until I hit the far side of Henderson Bay, which was over a mile away, I was going to have to turn around at some point and bring my kayak abeam to the waves. And it was kind of an interesting paddle at that point.
Yeah, suddenly you feel a little bit closer to that knife's edge, eh?
Yeah.
Just a smidge.
Yeah. Yeah. It was like, maybe I should paddle all the way over there and turn around. I've actually done that once when it was rough. Instead of turning, I paddled and beached on Cutts Island and then turned the kayak around on the shore and paddled back the other direction so I wouldn't have to turn at sea or at Henderson Bay. So Michael, if you do get an injury, what do you think about ice or heat?
No, I think initially ice to help control inflammation may be the right thing. There's conversation depending on how you injury and what type of tissue is involved. For how do you do that? First, protect it, you rest it, you ice it, you compress it, and you elevate it. The whole PRICE acronym, right? And
Right.
so there certainly is that role of quieting things down. But how do you control inflammation without using NSAIDs, or how do you help inflammation without using medication if needed? And one of the great tools is cryotherapy or ice, isn't it?
It is. It's nice, and I agree with you. First 24 to 72 hours after an acute injury, ice is really nice. If the caveat being, as we talked about earlier, if someone gets discomfort from using ice, then it's probably not a great idea. But and then after that first 24, 36 hours, if you want to alternate some heat with ice, also not bad. And then after 72 hours, really, it's probably more heat, with the exception that you use heat to kind of limber up a muscle before you exercise, and you use ice to cool it off after you're done.
Yeah, I think when we didn't have gray hair, I think we used to immobilize a lot of injuries that um, I think really, and you see this in how we recover from different orthopedic surgeries now, or different soft tissue injuries. It's how do you mobilize them safely as quick as you can mobilize them,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
With pain being the modulator there on how quickly can you work into that range of motion that is uh, reasonable without instigating more pain or more injury. And I think that is we rarely put people immobilized flat in bed anymore for all sorts of reasons, not only blood clotting reasons, but also there's enough data that mobility is a good thing even after a I would say grade 1 or grade 2 injury. Yeah.
Absolutely. Do you remember the old days of, like for me, it was high school. Um, it was very popular to use um, what was back then a product called Kramer Adgesic, which was similar to Ben Gay type stuff. And um, putting it on to warm up a muscle before you exercise, particularly if you had some injuries or if it was a cold day outside.
I never used it, but I remember smelling it.
Yeah. Well, what I remember most about it was we used to torture each other with it. Being boys in a boys' school, you would apply it to someone else's clothing and their personal items of clothing so that it would start making something very hot after they started exercising.
Well,
So,
but without going any farther, what would you do for low back strain?
yeah. So if there's anyone from St. Stephen's who remembers those days, shout out online. For low back strain, you know, ice is great for settling it down. Um, you know, I like some of the natural anti-inflammatories. Ginger's a nice one, making ginger tea. Um, um, it has COX-2 properties, and they kick in pretty quick. I have to say that a lot of times for acute injuries, I'm pretty quick, though, to go to ibuprofen and just get kind of a proven, known, easy COX inhibitor.
Yeah, I think that's true as long as it's not a bony injury, right? Um, Only because it causes enough constriction that we get to be aware of that. I think it's interesting also when there's tendon and bone injuries, the local application of nitroglycerin creams are interesting because you increase the blood flow, and it modulates the healing of those tendons. So you'll start seeing some of that, which you can't really get without a prescription. But so I agree that the NSAIDs, or the product that some of the combined products like Inflamed, or even the Metagenics product Caprix for its anti-inflammatory component, they're really very reasonable options.
Yeah. So we just got a question about real aspirin. Um, Real aspirin is an effective anti-inflammatory. The dose would be like 650 milligrams acutely. It's just a fair number of people get more gastrointestinal symptoms from aspirin than they do from ibuprofen, for example, even in the short term. And it may be my personal bias, so I'd be interested in hearing your feedback. But I personally feel that 800 milligrams of ibuprofen is a more effective pain reliever than 650 milligrams or 1,000 milligrams of aspirin.
Yeah, I think it's true. I think also I was involved in use the medical students as your subject study at University of Washington, where they wanted to see how quickly the stomach lining might respond to a single dose of aspirin and try and determine whether there were certain people that where there were signs of bleeding even after a single dose. And we got paid $75 to have them put an endoscope down to our stomach after a single dose of aspirin. And it was interesting. It was started the protocol, and by the third day of the protocol, on the second endoscopy, they had me removed from the study because I was having submucosal bleeding and I had no symptoms. And so I think it's interesting if you're a person who bruises from aspirin easily, it would be a reasonable thing to go with ibuprofen. Not that we're providing medical advice, but just the associations are interesting.
Absolutely. And, one of the things that should probably be said is body work as well. Massage, osteopathic, Rolfing, chiropractic, and they all have their indications. I think, massage is nice for addressing some of that stiffness, increasing some blood flow, increasing lymphatic drainage. It can be quite nice. And chiropractic, using high velocity to reestablish alignment of bones, and osteopathic or Rolfing. Ida Rolf was a student of James Still, who was kind of the founder of osteopathy. It was James, right? Or what was his first name? Maybe it was Andrew. Do you remember what Still's first name was? Anyway, maybe it was William. So I've just tossed a million names out there. But anyway, Ida Rolf was one of his students, and the osteopathy was using more low velocity techniques. And Ida Rolf's principles were that, you can acutely reestablish bony alignment, but if you haven't addressed the fascia, kind of the connective tissue around muscles and the fascia that kind of links ligaments to muscles and creates tissue spaces and the such, like that, tight fascia leads to pulling on a joint on one side, and lax fascia on the other doesn't support it enough, that you end up with, if you've got a crooked spine and you've gotten fibrosis on this side and laxity on this side, and you shove it back into order, into alignment, that the tight side's going to pull it back and the other side won't. So Rolfing and some of the osteopathic stuff is relax this side, tighten this side, and have it slowly come back into alignment.
Yeah, I think, in addition to that, we haven't mentioned the frequency specific microcurrent, or when you get frequency specific acupuncture type energy movement. And that's where, and you find that very effective for soft tissue edema, soft tissue response to injury, and enough that frequency specific microcurrent is used on quite a few of the sidelines of pro football teams. One of the first teams that used it was the Pittsburgh Steelers. And so there are all these different modalities. So I think the thing that we're talking about, Dr. Lamb, is if you injure yourself, there are things you can do so you don't suffer, and to improve resilience and recovery.
Yeah. we got a specific question about TENS, which works along the same sort of principles as the frequency-specific microcurrent machines do. Stimulating.
It's about 1/100th. Frequency-specific microcurrent is about 1/100th to 1/1000th of the electrical dose. With it is similar from the standpoint that they work on frequencies. I think the research on that is TENS actually doesn't have a restoration aspect of energy within the cell, where frequency-specific microcurrent, there's a data that you actually do get increased energy production or levels within the cell. And it seems that microcurrent works on the cytochrome C component of your mitochondria. So you actually get some upregulation of ATP and energy metabolism versus depleting of it. So yes, TENS, the right therapeutic at the right time for the right injury for the right person is what we're talking about. But you can certainly see there are a lot more availabilities now for direct-to-consumer TENS units, and even make very specific magnet therapies being used. So,
Yep.
Try not to suffer.
Right. And we left out the potential for CBD creams and the such, which have benefit in some of the non-steroidal creams. I think that the key take home is there are lots of options. Some of them, as you said, rest, icing, compression, elevation, and you used a different acronym though than RICE, right?
PRICE. It's PROTECT was the first one, right?
Oh, PRICE. Okay, PROTECT. Right. Okay.
Right. So, you want to protect it from other injuries, and you want to rest, and you want to ice, and you want to compress, and you want to elevate.
So simple things we can all do, non-steroidals or ginger tea or topical arnica. We didn't get into the homeopathics a lot. I actually like Bach flower remedy as an oral sort of agent for acute stress, particularly when there's a pain component. Certainly for little kids, we used to use Bach flower remedy a ton.
Sure. Sure.
Our kids used to request it. They'd get a hug first, and then they'd be like, "Can we have some of the flowers?" So, but so lots of different things to do, and we touched upon some of the more chronic pieces. We didn't talk about prolotherapy, and we didn't talk about stem cells and those sorts of things for more chronic injuries. I think the answer is knowing your specific setting, figuring out what's best for you, seeing if it's a short-term versus a long-term problem. And as you said, making a choice that's goal dependent about where you want to go and working with a good practitioner.
That's right.
And a caveat about Rolfing is it's an amazing technique, but it's not necessarily not a painful technique. Friend from high school, Kasper Scafidi, who was president of the Rolf Institute at one point in time, used to say during working during working on me, he used to say things like, "This is going to hurt you more than it hurts me." So,
I mean, that's not my love language. So
yeah, I went to a very I'm very happy with my high school experience, but all these people who I went to high school with, and when I think back about some of the lessons we learned, some of them were a little maladaptive. So anyway, thank you, Michael, for your time this afternoon.
Absolutely. Hopefully hopefully from this we gave you techniques that were more adaptive than maladaptive. So with that,
Yes.
we'll see you next week.
And thank you all for all of our listeners up on the Olympic Peninsula who joined us today. So thank you, and have fun.